Welcome to the Solo Edit Podcast, a podcast for estheticians looking for a weekly dose of motivation, inspiration, and honest conversations about life in and out of the treatment room. Hey, I'm really excited to have this guest on today. His name is Chris Hubble, and he's from LuxMed Transition, and he is going to talk about exit strategy. I know a lot of us solo estheticians, we don't necessarily think about what happens at the end of our career. You know, we're so focused on providing the best treatments and doing laundry and marketing and emails and all of the things, but we don't think about what it may look like if we ever decide to sell our business. And so he is joining us today to talk about all things exit strategy. I am here with Chris Hubble, and I'm really excited to have him on the podcast because he has a lot of insight into our industry and what we can do to strengthen our brands, and if necessary, or if we want to have an exit strategy, what we can do to move that along. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Chris. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about your business and what you do?
Yeah. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me. I'm real excited to be on with you guys, and hopefully, the information I have is valuable. I'm with LuxMed Transition Strategies. We're an M&A advisory firm, which is just basically a very fancy term of saying we are a broker or an advisor that can help groups or practices or individuals that are looking to go to market to sell their business. We can help them either find an individual buyer or help them find more of a group or a private equity buyer, depending on size and ultimately what their goals are at the end of the day. So we really help sellers find and get the outcome that they're looking for, whether that's now or in the future.
That's awesome. And again, I'm so excited to have you because I don't think a lot of solo estheticians, which is our main audience, think about what is my exit strategy? What am I going to do later on in life? And so it's awesome to have you on today to give some insight. So I'm curious what trends you are seeing in the aesthetics and wellness industry for solo providers or even small spas.
There's a lot that has been changing over the last, call it 12 to 24, 36 months. The trend really started post-COVID, where the Zoom world had really come into play, where everybody needed to look their best, feel their best. They were on a lot of Zoom calls with a lot of close-ups that people just weren't used to, right? And so nowadays, what you're seeing is a lot of interest, not just from the solo practitioner, but the anestheticians coming into the space and opening up a business. And it used to be very, there were a couple spas that had popped up, but now the market is much more saturated. And you're really starting to see this heavy focus on, there's a lot of opportunity. And so how do we capture that and take advantage of that? And so the economic conditions are just really in a great spot to be able to open a business. And you still have a ton of interest in the space, whether it's from an individual or from groups that want to kind of consolidate them and make them into something bigger, whether that's a big facial bar or if you get into the med spa world. There's just a lot of opportunities out there for even small solo providers that want to make a name for themselves.
And how is that investor interest impacting solo estheticians or small clinic owners?
That's a great question. For me, when I look at it, one of the things that we're seeing heavy in 2025 is, like I said, it's becoming very saturated in terms of how many providers are out there or how many shops are opening up. And so really right now, it's all about being able to capture that individual to come into the spa. And I think having a lot of these groups, they're very educated and they're very well versed in how to attract that individual, right? And so it makes it a little bit harder for the solo provider because you're going up against a big boy that has a big budget and seemingly unlimited funds, right? Whether that's emails or marketing campaigns or whatever it is, billboards, they've kind of got that endless budget, but there's still a lot of room because not everybody wants to go to those big box groups.
Yeah.
They want to have that individual relationship. They want to know who they're going in to see every single time. It's not just someone different. And so it gives you a lot of the ability to differentiate yourself. And so, I think there's a challenge and then there's the positive side, because the positive side is that there is an exit at the end of the day. You can see, okay, well, who do I want to sell my business to? Because those people ultimately, most people go into a business, especially in the healthcare space, they forget about, the challenging things of buying supplies, managing a profit and loss statement or an income statement. They got to do the marketing. They've got to manage maybe one or two employees, something like that. And they got to pay the bills, and all of that kind of gets taken off your plate when you join a group. And so it gives you that opportunity to partner with somebody that can help support your growth and ultimately provide kind of that next step in the journey in your business.
Yeah. I want to ask you, what are some of the biggest opportunities or challenges that you're seeing for solo estheticians or, small spas, aside from just like a saturated market?
One of the biggest challenges, some of those viral trends. I'm thinking that's what you're wanting to get into.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of these viral trends where Instagram, TikTok, whatever social media platform you're on, they kind of guide where people are interested in doing things. But as a solo provider, you also want to make sure that you have your core business buttoned up.
Yeah.
And whether that's facials, dermaplaning, whatever it is, make sure that you stick to that one little piece and then maybe supplement with some of those viral trends and make sure that it doesn't just become, the majority of your business and the majority of your clients. It's a well-rounded business model at the end of the day. And so those clients that are coming in, make sure, like I said, that core is there. And then you supplement with those trends, because those viral trends, they're viral for a reason. They ultimately will disappear, and I think about, and maybe you could speak to some of this, but, just a few years ago, it was, you needed to have chemical peels and all this things. And now the trend is, well, let's soften that, right? And let's be more gentle on the skin, but figure out how to still get kind of that same result, but not through such abrasive facials and those types of things. And so they come and go. And so making sure that that core business stays there and then you supplement. So I think that's definitely a challenge.
I couldn't agree more. You have to have your basics and you have to speak to your clients that are going to be loyal and stick with you, and then supplementing some of those, like funner, and I'm using air quotes, funner or viral or trendy things, just to keep them excited or interested, but not to get sucked into the reality of all the things that are kind of out there.
Yeah, it's definitely easy to go down that rabbit hole because it is fun. Yeah. And it is exciting. It's different, but those things can go away in a flash, just like they show up in a flash.
Right.
And so if you don't have that core business from your clients, then you could ultimately be in a world of hurt without that.
For sure. You've mentioned saturated market a couple of times. So do you have any tips on how a solo esthetician could stand out in a saturated market?
Yeah, I think really being on top of your game and following up on leads. I had listened to one of your other podcasts about making sure that you are doing emails, or at least hiring somebody to help support with email blasts and those types of things, and generating those leads. I think for a solo provider, it is super critical to follow up with those leads. They're not just going to walk in the door anymore like they used to. And so I thought it was great advice on your other podcast around making sure that those marketing plans, that you're truly getting the return on the spend when it comes to trying to get patients to come in the door, because it is saturated and it is what it is. But as a solo provider, it's critical to make sure that you are following up on those leads when they come in the door and trying to get them in, even if it's just for the basics.
Yeah.
And then trying to upsell them, if you will, on some of those funner viral trends here and there, but at least get them in the door. And I think that's one way you can stand out, and just being able to build a relationship with your clientele. Some of these bigger groups, they forget about what it is to have a relationship. It's just dollars. So having that relationship with those folks that are coming in, you build loyalty with them. And I think that's really an easy way to stand out is if you gain that loyalty from your clients.
Yeah. And I always say there's so many solo estheticians that, you know, when you go to see them, it feels really transactional. And so one way to set yourself apart is to have that personal touch. And with emails, before I really started doing email marketing, I thought, who's going to read these? I'm always unsubscribing. But if you actually have a client base that's interested in you and what you're doing, and that is really unique to being a solo esthetician because we do build these relationships, they do read your emails and they do open and they do want to support you. So it's a lot different than, you know, being on Home Depot's, you know, marketing list.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's very different.
And they want to support small businesses and they want to support that solo provider, like you said. So they are reading them.
Yeah.
And they do find the information interesting and they do want to respond. You know, yes, there is a line. I think even in your podcast, you were like, you don't want to beat them up with emails because then they will unsubscribe.
Right.
So there is a limit, but I do think they are definitely interested. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to see you. And so making sure that it's not transactional is very critical. And it's more relationship and making sure that, you know, you do build that rapport.
Yeah. You know, I'm on Facebook. We have an active Facebook group and I'm seeing a lot of posts and just hearing through, you know, all of the SD web about some slower months coming ahead. Usually June and July are kind of slow. But in addition to that, just with everything that's happening within our economy, a lot of estheticians are mentioning that like they're noticing clients aren't booking or pre-booking. And so I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of how some clinic owners or estheticians, how they're kind of prioritizing operations and revenue growth.
Yeah. That's a tough one because as a solo provider, you're so reliant on that consistent business. And when you don't get it, as long as you can kind of see those trends, and maybe you've been in business for a year or two, or maybe even less, you'll start to see where those trends occur.
Yeah.
And which months are going to be the decreases. So making sure that while things are going well, you're taking full advantage of it. And then when things are slow, you work on marketing, you work on the business side of things and making sure that you're as sound as you can. I think a lot of small businesses or solo providers still forget that there's two sides to an income statement. There's revenue and then there's expenses. And so maybe you decrease the amount of supplies that you're buying in those months.
Right.
Yes, you still have to continue to market because eventually it's going to ramp back up once the summer's over and people are back in town and school's back in session and all of that. But I also think there's a way to help mitigate some of those down months by, you know, getting your name out there with some of these companies. Like if you're in, like I'm in Dallas, like if you can find a way to get in with a relationship with like a Southwest Airlines or something like that, or even, you know, the teachers when they're off for summer, like how do you get them in the door? Because it's hard for a teacher to come in during the school year. So maybe there's different ways to kind of get creative. But I do think understanding where the trends are is super important. So you know how to mitigate the downside to those down months.
That's why I always say if you are a solo esthetician, you're a business owner first and you are an esthetician second, because you have to be able to analyze what's happening within your business, whether it's noticing seasonal changes in, you know, your client's behavior of like what they're buying in retail or what they're booking, you know, to your point about purchasing supplies. Like maybe you need to look and see if there's other ways to purchase your products cheaper. Or I'm noticing that some estheticians are going in and buying bulk with other estheticians so that they're getting deals. It's really important that we as solo estheticians are able to kind of dissect our business and find ways to market and be creative and not just be focused on, you know, what we're actually doing in the treatment room. It's a very unique type of career, right? Because as a solo esthetician, you are not just doing facials and continuing education, but then you're doing your marketing and your laundry and all these other things that kind of go with it. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. And I don't know what your experience is, but it almost seems like a lot of people, when they go into it as a solo provider, they don't realize that there's all those extra things.
Yeah.
They think, hey, I can't wait. I'm going to open my own business and I'm going to have my own shop. And it's just going to be me and I don't have to deal with anything else. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're hit with, oh my gosh, I have to do the ordering. Like you said, I got to do the laundry. I've got to do everything. I got to do the marketing. When am I going to find time to do all of this?
Yeah.
And so I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said that you're a business owner first and an esthetician second, because you still have to look at the expenses. You still have to think about all of those different things. And it's super critical to make sure that those are all top of mind. Otherwise, and I hate to say this, you may not have a business if you don't understand those trends and those types of things. I mean, as I say, there's a lot of saturation, and the ones that can own and operate a business first are the ones that are going to be successful. The ones that can't, I mean, I'm on part of a Facebook group, and it's a lot of just, hey, I'm closing my shop and I didn't realize it was going to be this difficult and all this. And it's, managing and owning that business is so critical. And especially with everything that's going on in the economy with the potential tariffs. And, you could go all down that rabbit hole if you want, but understanding that there are people out there to help you or groups out there to help you in terms of like you mentioned, a group purchasing organization that can help you get better cost on your supplies, making sure that you're finding the right laundry vendor if you're doing that. I mean, those types of things. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, but you've got to be resilient at the end of the day and understand what the trends are of your business. And everybody's different to a certain extent, but it's the same across the stratosphere if you're looking at solo providers.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk exit strategy. Like I said, a lot of estheticians, we don't really think about what happens when we're 65 years old and do we just retire? Or could we possibly sell our business? So what exactly is an exit strategy? What does that mean? And what could that look like for us?
Yeah, I think that's something that I talk to a lot of individuals about. What is the goal at the end of the day? Is your goal to eventually become more than a solo provider? Add more chairs, become a facial bar, if you will. I think there's a lot of different paths that one can take. So I think when you look at what does an exit strategy mean, for me, everybody's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is, because of the interest from different groups out there, whether it's a med spa or a wellness clinic or a private equity firm, or a group, there's opportunities that you can actually go out and find a partner that you can sell your business to. And so one of the things that you want to make sure that you're doing is that you've got a very strong brand identity and a loyal client base.
Right.
Because when you're looking for that future partner, you've got to be able to say, hey, my revenue is reoccurring because my client base is super loyal to me.
Right.
And people really love, if you're creating a brand, make sure that brand is very identifiable.
Yeah.
Everybody, like I said, has got a different exit path. So it's really getting in and digging into what sometimes I feel like, as like I said, I'm an advisor, or sometimes I feel like a therapist at the same time, because everybody doesn't really think about it. And so then you start having these long conversations and you kind of go different directions. And then ultimately you figure out, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And I tell a lot of groups that I work with that going through this process, you're going to find out what you don't want more than you're going to find out what you want. You're going to talk to different people, different groups. There's a right path and a wrong path. And I think the more you look at different options, you're going to figure out which is the right path for you. So the nice thing is there's so much interest in this space that 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was no exit strategy. It was, hey, we're going to close the doors, lock the doors, and we're done.
Yeah.
Now it's, hey, there's a value to the business that you built. And how do you get that value out of it and finding that right partner or that right relationship?
You keep saying partner. What are some other kind of options that might be out there?
I assume you're kind of thinking about like private equity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from a private equity standpoint, there's a lot of, and I don't want to get too into the weeds around private equity, but they really like this business. And private equity is essentially just a group of investors that have put their money into a firm that goes out and invests on their behalf. And so a private equity firm really likes this space because it's A, highly fragmented, and B, it's got a lot of reoccurring revenue. And so they look for how do we consolidate groups or individual providers and create a group. And so that's definitely one option. And I think depending on size, a private equity would be very interested in a solo provider, pending that they see it as a scalable or as a brand that can grow. And you add more chairs, you add more providers, you can bring on and I say partner, you can bring on another esthetician that can support another chair, maybe bring on a nurse, start looking at it from more of the med spa side, or, have somebody that can do different service lines like lasers or Botox or whatever it is at the end of the day. So there's definitely some different ways to be able to find that exit and find that right. I call it a partner generically, but it's just finding that right exit.
Got it. Okay. When should you start thinking of your exit strategy? Is it when you first open and that's part of your business plan, or is it, years down the line? Like, when would one want to start thinking about that?
I would say it doesn't have to be day one, but I would say that you should still manage the business as you're going to have an exit at some point. And what I mean by that is we've talked a lot about managing expenses. You're a business owner first.
Right.
So making sure that you're doing everything the right way so that you can stay in business, number one, and that you can then grow that business. And so when should you really start to look for an exit? Yes, it's a little bit at the very beginning, but if you're looking to find an exit, it's usually within 3 to 5 years of when you want to retire or you want to stop working. And so that gives you time to go through evaluation. It gives you time to understand your options. And most individuals that are going to come in and partner with you, or a private equity firm or anything like that, they're going to want you to work for a few more years because your hands is what's generating the revenue. So if you leave, there's no revenue.
Right.
Right. And so they want to be able to come in and utilize and pick your brain around why you do certain things and how you do them, how you do your marketing, and you're also generating that revenue. So I would say anywhere between 3 to 5 years before you want to do something. But I would also say it's never a bad idea to just get a valuation done to see where you stand.
Yeah.
For me, I have always said my big thing is I always manage based off of data, not off of emotion. And so making sure that you have all the data that you need to make that right decision. And it's not just an emotional one that just happens all of a sudden.
Yeah. So you say the data that we need, but what is the data that we would need to provide should we kind of step out there and look to see if anyone was interested in purchasing or acquiring? Like, what would be the KPIs or what numbers? Because I know a lot of estheticians don't have bookkeepers and are doing everything themselves. So what are the numbers, or what are the things that are really going to strengthen and position itself?
From my standpoint, knowing how many patients you're seeing per week, per month, I think is always a really good number. And I understand a lot don't have bookkeepers, but making sure that you understand your expenses. Like for us, to do evaluation, we really look at the income statement or the profit and loss statement, the P&L.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, there has to be money being made at the bottom of the line.
Right.
And so knowing those KPIs, that how many patients do I need to see per day to offset the amount of expenses that I'm paying?
Right.
Right. And I think those are all super important. And so for us, we look at P&L, and then we look at some of those operational reports. Like I said, how many patients you're seeing per day, what type of treatments you're doing, how much is an average treatment cost per patient, what is the lifetime value of a patient? And that gets a little more complicated, but you definitely look at some of those just basic KPIs, and then you can say, okay, making sure that that is then in my P&L so that someone like us can do evaluation and see what the business is valued at.
Yeah. It is so important to remember, especially in our industry, there's so many courses or mentors that have these programs that say, we'll teach you how to be a 6-figure esthetician or make $10,000 months. But if you're making $10,000, but all of your bills are $9,000 and your profit is $1,000, it doesn't really matter. And I think that so many of us are preyed upon because we're not really taught that simple concept. Because again, we went to a study, we are estheticians. Right. We didn't necessarily go to business school. And so, back to just knowing your numbers and knowing what to track is so, so important.
And I do think if you're a solo provider that's looking to bring on a second esthetician,
Yeah.
I see all the time, hey, I want a percentage. I want, this crazy high percentage. Well, you have to also make sure there's something left over for you at the end of the day.
Right.
It shouldn't just all go to them and then you pay the expenses. And then to your point, hey, there's a couple $100 left over. You're the owner. You should be making a bigger percentage than your individual that you're bringing on as a esthetician, right? And so I think it is super critical to make sure that you're managing your expenses and understanding that there is money, and I look to your point, everybody says, hey, you need to be at $10,000 a month. This is what you do. But people forget that there's the second half of that.
Right.
And you've got to be able to pay your rent. You got to be able to turn on your lights. You got to be able to,
right.
all those other expenses. And if you forget about that, then you're at the end of the day not in a good position.
Right. At that point, it's just like a hobby. You're not making any money.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And hey, some people enjoy that, right? And I think knowing what your end goal is at the end of the day is super important. Because if it is a hobby, then it's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to own and operate a successful business, then it no longer is in the hobby phase. Then you've really got to understand both sides of what it means to generate revenue and pay for those expenses.
What are some ways that we can diversify revenue as solo estheticians? And when we look at that and diversifying our business, does that also strengthen our business in terms of if we choose to sell it?
Yeah, there's definitely ways to diversify. I think you kind of look at some of those trends that we talked about earlier, supplementing. But I think when you're looking to take an exit, making sure that that core business is there, and then you supplement with those different trends and you're able to kind of upsell your client base to do those trends and to be a part of that. But keeping that core business, I would say that, somebody told me a long time ago, people pay a lot of money for something that's boring because it's successful. You don't have to think about it. If you're all over the place and you're dabbling in this and dabbling in that, then it's hard to replicate. And so, it goes back to having that core business and those core treatments, and then you supplement from there on those different viral trends that are coming.
Yeah.
And maybe you test out some things and see if they work. And if it becomes something to where, it can be part of your core, but it doesn't overtake any one part of your business or one set of treatments from your business.
Yeah.
So.
And then you have things like memberships and
yes,
retail. A lot of solo estheticians drop ship, which is so great for a lot of reasons, but also we are creatures of instant gratification. So we want to purchase something as we're leaving. And so having retail, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I love the idea of memberships.
Yeah.
We have a lot of individuals that have memberships, and it's a great way to help also in those months that are down, right? The Junes and the Julys of the year, if you have memberships and that reoccurring revenue coming in, maybe you don't see the patients, but they still are on a monthly membership.
Right.
And that money is coming in the door to help pay for some of those costs. And then those maintenance focused treatments are also, I think, super important to help diversify some of that revenue. So yeah. And then I love retail. I mean, if, you pick one or two brands that your clientele loves,
right,
and those are the ones you carry. If you carry too much, then you're spending too much on expenses and maybe it sits on the shelf too long or whatever. You pick some of those core ones that your clientele obviously love and buy. Having those would be a great way to diversify the revenue.
Yeah. With working with so many different companies, the ones that are really successful, what are some things that have stood out to you in terms of how they have been able to build a really loyal customer base or have really been able to strengthen their brand?
It's brand identity, I think, is very, very important, especially this day and age. You can get a bad name for yourself. And so making sure that that brand is in line with your clientele and what they believe in is super important. And then making sure that you've got efficient operations, making sure that the back end of things make a lot of sense and are cleaned up and you're not overspending on things. But I would go back to just making sure that you've got a really strong brand identity to help stand out and making sure that overall you've got those different service lines that your clientele want.
Yeah. And when we talk about brand, we're not just saying logo and colors.
Yeah.
It's your systems. It's how you talk to your customers. It's
your identity.
It's your identity. It's different for everybody, and it can be as detailed as you want it, but it's like the little things that make you stand out. Your mission, your values, it's like all of that just kind of rolled into one. And I think that if you can brand yourself well, you will stand out from what others are doing. Because again, most of us are estheticians and not marketing gurus. And so,
but I think that's what that brand or that identity is, what takes you from being transactional to relationship building. So that is super critical. It's how you greet them when they walk in the door. It's how you follow up with them after. It's, how you're talking to them, what you believe in, and the brand. If you have retail, the brands that you carry, those types of things. And so it's more than just the logo, to your point, the logo and the name on the door.
Right.
It's really how you treat people.
Yeah.
And that gets you away from that transactional kind of relationship side of things.
So if somebody came to you and they said, I want a valuation of my business. I want to know what my business is worth, or maybe you have tips on how I can improve, strengthen, scale my business. What does that look like?
So we actually go through, for us, it's a no obligation free valuation. So what we want at the end of the day is people to have the data, like I said, and really giving them a baseline of where things stand. And so hopefully you have a P&L. If you don't, QuickBooks is super easy, super inexpensive at generating P&Ls, making sure that we look at a lot of that, because most people that are coming on board that want to get a valuation done want to understand the health of the business, right? And so the best way to do that is through a profit and loss statement or a P&L. And so we look at that. We look at some operational reports and what percentage of businesses, the different service lines and how those generate business, which one, is more profitable than the others. So we look at all of that. And part of that is just getting into whatever the system of choice is to track your clients and stuff. So I think for us, it's just looking at a P&L, looking at some operational reports, and it's as simple as that. And then we put together an analysis and it says, hey, we think they're this level of value, or if you want to get to here are some pointers on what you could do to continue to grow the business and become more valuable down the road.
That's awesome. And for those listening that are interested, how can they find you or find more information?
It's super easy. If you just go to our website, LuxMedTransition.com, there's just a contact us page. It actually goes directly to me. So happy to provide whatever information we can. And additional, like I said, any additional data, and love to just have a conversation and learn more about the business.
Thank you so much for joining today. It's been very eye-opening. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Sarah. Glad you had me on.